All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome. We are going to give this just about a minute or two to let everybody stream in from the waiting room and connect. For that, I'm just going to share this part of my screen so that everybody knows they're coming to the right place, that this is where they mean to be. All right, so it's looking like we are all about here. We'll get started. If other people keep streaming in, that's great. But I am Danielle Wetmore. I am the Director of Education for the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation, and I am so grateful that all of you are here today, including Jennifer and Duncan, who will be speaking, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. I just want to start with some housekeeping now. You have joined with your cameras off and your mics muted. That's just to make sure that we're keeping everybody's privacy at the level that they want it to be when joining something. You are more than welcome to turn your camera on if you would like to engage in that way. We do ask that you stay muted throughout the program because we are recording this and it will be on our YouTube so that people who weren't able to join tonight will be able to still access this material and this conversation. Your face will not be recorded unless you are one of our official speakers. So even if you turn your camera on, you won't be part of that YouTube experience. The chat is a good place for you to put any questions that you have. Myself and my colleague Gabe will be facilitating that chat and holding and passing those questions to Jennifer and Duncan at the end of the program when we have our Q&A section. If subtitles or closed captioning is helpful to you, you can open that for yourself on Zoom. You can go to your menu. Depending on exactly the device you're on, your menu might be in slightly different locations. And if you don't see captions immediately available on your menu, press the three dots that say more, and it should come up that way. Again, we will be in conversation for the beginning, not in conversation, we'll have presentations for the beginning of this, and then at the end, we will open it up for your questions. We do ask that your questions are pertinent to a wider audience than simply yourself. I know that many of us are on genealogy journeys, researching our own families, are stuck in some places. And let's make sure that because this is such an open forum and will be at places for a wider ranging group of people, that we are asking questions that can be pertinent to more than just really specific loopholes or spots that we've ended up in our journeys. But because I didn't know everybody's exact familiarity with Angel Island, I wanted to start off with just a brief overview of the history of Angel Island as an immigration station first. This picture on the right is from the National Archives, and it shows the image that immigrants would have seen upon getting off of their ferries from their steamships arriving at Angel Island. And this was the experience from 1910 to 1940. That is the period that the Angel Island Immigration Station was open. And in that time, about 1 million people passed through the port of San Francisco. The people who came through here came from about 80 different countries, and about 300,000 were detained. So 1 million people passing through, that's both entries and exits. And that doesn't mean that everybody who is immigrating is necessarily stepping off the boat onto Angel Island, because your financial situation, your financial picture, dictated whether or not you were doing that. So if you were a first-class passenger on a steamship, you likely were not getting off of the boat at Angel Island. You were going directly to San Francisco. But of those 300,000 that were detained, about 100,000 were Chinese, 85,000 were Japanese, 8,000 were South Asian, 8,000 were Russian and Jewish, about 1,000 Koreans, 1,000 Filipinos, and 400 Mexican immigrants. But of course, Angel Island isn't only an immigration station. After the immigration station closes in 1940, the US Army takes over the site and incorporates it into a larger Army base here known as Fort McDowell. So this is the North Garrison of Fort McDowell then. And so after the immigration station closed, the US Army use the remaining buildings to hold approximately 600 Japanese immigrants from Hawaii and 100 from the continental United States in the direct aftermath of Pearl Harbor. These were largely religious and community leaders, journalists, photographers, consular agents, and even martial artists who were arrested because of their perceived ties to Japan after the attack. None of them were found to be guilty of committing espionage, but they were targeted for their identities and their community ties. The men were typically held at Angel Island for about a week or a little bit more before being sent out to other Department of Justice enemy alien camps. We have all of this information, and we've been working on disseminating this information. And this program is part of this larger project taken from our family's exhibit. So taken from their family's exhibit, which is a physical exhibit on Angel Island. This picture shows that exhibit space. We also have a virtual component at SciArc. And I'll put this link in the chat, and I highly recommend that you take a look at that as well. But today, and where do these conversations bring us? We have these conversations about the past to link them to the present. And I want to take a moment and for us to all sit in community today and think about our mission, vision, and values, and how the history of Angel Island, the history of Japanese incarceration and detention link to our mission, vision, and values. Then I will introduce Jennifer and Duncan more formally and then hand it over to them. I'm not going to read 100% of this, but I will read our vision because this is our looking towards the future. And I hope that we are able to do this together. AIISF is committed to a future in which all persons across the US understand the history of immigration through Angel Island, leverage this knowledge by treating immigrants with increased respect and empathy, and are committed to increasing equity, justice, and belonging for all communities. Jennifer is going to be speaking second today, but introduced first. Her journey at Ancestry began more than 20 years ago with a love of editing, writing, and publishing, and a strong desire to remain close to her Utah roots. Today, her passion for storytelling remains at an all-time high, thanks in part to the technological innovations she's witnessed throughout her career. Stories that once took days to research now unfold in minutes. It's Jennifer's job to surface the power of Ancestry for television programming, public relations campaigns, and media outlets. Duncan is the Alton Brooks Professor of Religion at the University of Southern California and the director of USC Shinso Ito Center for Japanese Religions and Culture. He is also the director of Ire National Monument for the World War II Japanese American Incarceration and author of 7 books, including a monograph about Buddhism and the World War II camps, American Sutra. And so without further ado, I will pass this on to Duncan.
Okay, great. Let's see. I'm going to try to share my screen and use some images, and I think Jen will also follow suit when it comes to sharing a few images with you as we, as we try to go through our presentations. So in my section of today's theme about Angel Island and Japanese American incarceration, I want to try to give you a sense of 3 things. Number one, something about the project that I'm directing called the IDE project, give you a quick overview about that, and then say a word about Angel Island in the larger network or the broader story of the World War II Japanese American incarceration. What kind of detention facility was it, and how does it fit into the larger story? So I want to give a sense of that. And finally, I'd like to say a few words about the kind of heart of the IDE project, which is this it began as an effort to account for, acknowledge, and honor every single person of Japanese ancestry who was incarcerated in one of more than 75 different confinement sites around the country, and our effort to make sure nobody is left out, and that we have, as of this moment, well over 125,000 names that we have been able to of individuals who we've been able to verify as having been incarcerated during the wartime period. And then a quick word about how we are making efforts to ensure that not only do we not leave anybody out, but we render their names accurately. It's, I think, quite well known that World War II era government documents misspelled people's names, and you can't really honor people if you don't account for them, number one, but also if you misspell their names. And so I'm going to say a few words about that. So at the top, very quickly, I wanted to share with you the scope of what our project is. It's a monument project to the people of, who were incarcerated back in World War II. Number one, by creating simply a book of names, a printed edition of every single person, which we had at the time of the first printing, which was 125,284 names, which was sequenced by date of birth. So just in the kind of Japanese tradition of honoring elders, we started with the oldest person who was incarcerated, a 90-some-year-old individual, to the baby born right before the last of the camps closed, is the last name in this book of names. And it's been on display at the Japanese American National Museum, where we've invited the public to come and acknowledge names by placing a small Japanese hunko stamp underneath a name in the book. So that's called the Irecho, and we are inspired. You see this image, the monument built by the incarcerated themselves in Manzanar, one of the 10 large War Relocation Authority camps, called the Ireto. It literally means the tower to console the spirits. And it was made, I think, with the intention, this is Reverend Shinjo Nagatomi in front of it, that it was meant to console those who died in camp, to make sure they weren't forgotten, to console their spirits in dying in such a circumstance, unfortunate circumstance. And then it was also meant to console the spirits of those who were left behind, those who family members who had to think about a life thereon. And so our project is kind of inspired by the idea that we need to, just like they did back in World War II, acknowledge those who experienced the camps, but find a method to reckon with that history and find a way to also bring some kind of repair work to the kind of aftermath of camp as well. And part of the repair work is doing this project of making sure nobody's left out and making sure people's names are spelled accurately, and that's correcting the historical record. And that's what's online. It's called Irezo. Zo in Japanese means like storehouse. And so it's the kind of archive or storehouse online, www.irezo.net. You can find it. And it's a searchable database of all of the individuals, and you can look people up by their names, by their camps, by their date of birth, etc. And this is where we've also, I wanted to acknowledge two organizations, including the Angel Island Immigration Station Foundation, because Grant In and others who did some amazing, important research on Angel Island and what happened during World War II. We've been working with groups like that to make sure we are not leaving anybody out. And we've worked with probably 100 different organizations, research teams, to make sure this has been documented accurately. And that's reflected on the IDEZO, and that's where our second main partnership comes into play, which is with Ancestry. And Jen will probably touch on this much more in the presentation to come about how our project has very much relied on many different kinds of sources in Ancestry, whether it be World War II draft cards or immigration records or naturalization records or birth certificate. There are many, many resources in Ancestry that has allowed us to correct the names as found on government records where they've incorrectly spelled names. And finally, I'm not going to talk about this very much at all today, but we have at a number of the different former sites from whether it's Manzanar, Minidoka, Jerome, and Roller, we're building sculptural installations that are not name monuments per se. They're not a monument with all the names on it, but the names are symbolic, and we are including the names into these, I think, very beautiful artistic installation pieces that will be on the sites of those very grounds of incarceration. So that's the IDE project in a nutshell. I want to talk a little bit now about Angel Island, and actually maybe I'm going to go ahead a few slides and go to this one here. As Danielle had already mentioned, the army camp that existed on Angel Island alongside the immigration station, and where the immigration station during World War II, or I guess almost during World War II, took over the buildings of the immigration station and therefore served as a detention facility for not only enemy aliens, but also some, not that many, but some prisoners of war, etc. This was an important, army, installation during World War II. I believe hundreds of, like 300,000, some very large number of those who served in the Pacific Theater of Operations during World War II moved through for MacDowell. But as you can see on this document, it's a so-called internee card, part of the Department of Justice collection. There are thousands and thousands of these cards of those who were picked up not in the usual, more well-known kind of history of the mass removal and incarceration of Japanese Americans from the West Coast that came under the Executive Order 9066 issued by President Roosevelt in February 1942, but under a different regime of incarceration and legal justification that had to do with this. The word they tended to use in the time was enemy alien. The classification of those who, in a time of war and national security threat, would be deemed a person that the government could, through a different legal process, round up, have presidential warrants, custodial detention facilities ready for individuals that, as Danielle kind of already alluded to, were meant for those deemed by the government as the highest security risk. The FBI, the ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence, the Army G2, and the Department of Justice all coordinated together to create these ranked lists, is sometimes called the ABC list, but these ranked lists of people, A being the most dangerous to national security, B being slightly less dangerous, and C. And people who are in that A category were right on Pearl Harbor Day, starting on December 7th, 1941, even before the smoke had cleared at Pearl Harbor. The very first person picked up was Reverend Gikyo Kuchiba of the Honpa Hongaji Buddhist Temple in Honolulu. And 30 minutes later, martial law was declared, and hundreds and hundreds of more people on the days following Pearl Harbor, in the weeks following Pearl Harbor, and into March or so of 1942, in all of those weeks and months under a different regime, these community people who were deemed community leaders, people who were able to influence others, people who were deemed as having ties culturally, militarily, otherwise with Japan, whether true or not, were picked up and taken to initially a temporary detention station. And so one way to think about Angel Island is to look at somebody like this individual here, Wakijiro Yuki, who was apprehended on the very kind of tail end of the roundups. You see the roundups concentrating in December and January, and then in February there's a big roundup of Japanese language teachers. But anyway, he's on the tail end of the roundup, and he ends up initially after being apprehended in Los Gatos, California, being taken to the immigration station in San Francisco, taken to another site the next day, Sharp Park, and then transferred in a little bit later in the year, August of 42, to Fort McDowell, before going on to a U.S. Army facility, Lordsburg, and then a Department of Justice facility after that, Santa Fe, and finally this a place called Crystal City, Texas, which is a family reunification center run by the Department of Justice. So that's this person's particular incarceration history, where Angel Island fits into his history as something where this individual was placed in the kind of earlier part of the incarceration history. People who were living primarily in San Francisco up into the central California area often found themselves at one of these three places: San Francisco INS building, Sharp Park in San Francisco, or Fort McDowell or Angel Island, also in San Francisco Bay Area. So those were the three. I bring up this card because it shows most people didn't go to all three, but many people who were initially rounded up as somebody who was suspected of being a threat to national security ended up in Sharp Park, I'm sorry, Fort McDowell or Angel Island early on in their incarceration history before spending much longer periods of time, sometimes even up to a year in some other Department of Justice or Army camp. And so in that way, one way to think about Angel Island is that it is much like many other temporary detention stations run by the Immigration and Naturalization Service of the Department of Justice, such as Tuna Canyon. So if you were in Southern California, where I'm based, almost everybody in LA or San Diego, like, was taken to a camp called Tuna Canyon Detention Station, located here in LA, and probably compared to Angel Island, probably about 2 or 3 times more people went through Tuna Canyon, but that just reflects the large number of Japanese persons in Southern California. But if you were a leader in Northern California, it would not be unheard of, in fact, quite likely that you might have gone and spent at least some portion of your incarceration history on Angel Island. In some cases, they just went to the San Francisco INS station before moving on, but in many cases, they also went to Angel Island. Danielle already mentioned the word Hawaii. So actually, most of the people on Angel Island, there's a second pattern, which is people who were initially incarcerated, picked up and incarcerated in Hawaii at a local county jail, a local INS station, Honolulu INS station, Sand Island, places like that, and then transferred to the mainland and en route to a place like on this card, like Lordsburg or Santa Fe or Fort Sill, Oklahoma, places like that would often spend maybe 1 week or 10 days or something like that, typically at Angel Island. And so I did want to just mention this kind of context of Angel Island as being either for the initial phase roundup, like Seattle INS Station or Tuna Canyon Detention Station in LA area, for the mainland incarcerees or internees, and also for the Hawaii people, a way station on towards other longer term internment at places like Lordsburg, Santa Fe, Fort Sill, etc. I'm going to go backwards just very briefly and wrap up because I know my time is running short. I wanted, in the third part of my talk, to give you a quick sense of how we are trying to accomplish the task of getting our names list together. And that involves both looking at Japanese language directories created by the internees themselves, as well as I mentioned, these government documents, which just so often have errors in spelling of Japanese names, especially. Let's see. And so our project has looked at many, many different kinds of very large camp rosters, very small camp rosters, those who are made by an individual, those who are made by a larger collective of people. Obviously, for today, I'm not going to really talk so much about the large camps, the War Relocation Authority camps, but they had both an entry form called Form 26 and then an exit roster that purportedly accounted for every single person who was in one of the 10 large War Relocation Authority camps. And one of the challenges with a place like Angel Island is that, yes, sometimes they appear on these internee cards, whether they're from the mainland or Hawaii, but oftentimes they forget, or these incarceration histories are incomplete. And so, Grant Dinh and others associated with the Angel Island group have done some wonderful work to try to fill those gaps, and we're thankful for their work. And on our side, we've also been doing additional research and looking at not only short rosters and snapshots in time accounting of who was there, but looking at other kinds of documents that like the one I have here, that note different people who are passing through Angel Island and different reports that are going to Washington, D.C. from San Francisco area that are documenting the details of these individuals' time there. Again, because their time there was short, it's unlike trying to research the larger Department of Justice camps and INS facilities that have these longer periods where you can see the names of people, how should we say, being accounted for more thoroughly. People, the government documents often correct themselves as time goes on, and they miss, incorrect dates of birth or name spellings get corrected over time. But in the case of Angel Island, that didn't happen, and so that's definitely one of the big challenges of this site. And so I know my time is up, so I'm going to try to wrap it up there. Maybe I'll stop sharing this and just say that in the discussion period, I'm very happy to talk more about the specifics of Angel Island research, more about how we've gone about the work of trying to make sure that we account for everybody who was incarcerated in any one of these camps, even if it was only for a few days at every one of these sites. So with that, let me close and hand things back to either Danielle or over to Jen.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Duncan. I really appreciate it. And yeah, we'll have more time to talk to Duncan in the Q&A section. I'm so glad that he called out Grant Din. We've done great work with him and we're so lucky to be associated with him. And I wanted to shout out to in our audience, we have Dr. Okawa today, who has also been part of this project and doing really important work for this as well. And with that, I will pass it on to Jennifer.
Thank you. It's such an honor to be here tonight. And this is the second time I've been able to present with Duncan, who is super impressive and just such a very nice man, and has just held my hand through the whole process. So I'm really happy to be here today. At Ancestry, my job is people bring me family trees or the beginning of family trees, and my team works to build out that family tree, find the best records we can find, and then read between the line of those records and tell really amazing stories about our ancestors. So while I am not an expert in Japanese research or Japanese American or Asian American research, what I am an expert in is using Ancestry's records and looking at a record and figuring out how to tell a story. So I hope some of the ideas that I can bring here today can help you telling your own stories. And I'm really lucky that I get to do this kind of work. I'm often touched and inspired by the stories of the people who came before us. But one of the things that I've learned in my research over the years is that everybody's family tree is very unique, right? We could all come from a very similar background, but once you start looking at your own family tree, you're going to find that they're all very unique individuals. All of our ancestors, well, our direct ancestors actually lived to adulthood or we wouldn't be here. So they at least made it that far. They lived through periods of rest. They lived through scary times. They lived through times that were good. They made individual choices. They had different skills. They had different numbers of children. Some of them lost children at a young age and had to deal with that heartbreak. So it's really important to not think of like any one group of people had one specific experience. And that's what I've loved about this project, because there's a group of people who shared this one big common injustice, and to just put them all together is to miss the real beauty of what their lives were like. You know, there were, what did Duncan say, 125,284 people who are named in his book. And I love that through this project, we've treated them as the unique individuals that they were. Each of these people received the gift of the volunteer's time. And if there were, discrepancies with what they were looking at, they got additional time with the project leaders who were taking care of it and making sure that they got that book as accurate as possible. And if you think about it, the idea of standardized names is kind of it's a modern thought. That's not something that we were really good at doing. It wasn't important to standardize names 100 years ago. And then we've got an added complication is in a lot of the records that the Japanese who are incarcerated are listed in were taken by government civil workers who didn't speak the language and they maybe didn't know it was a different alphabet. And so they're kind of at the mercy of that. So that was one of the things that was really important to Duncan and his team, is to go through and find what they considered the most accurate spelling of each person's name to be included in the book. So I'm going to share one of those case studies with you to see how they adjudicated that. Hurry and share my screen here and talk through some of that. I'm going to ask Danielle for a thumbs up that we're seeing the right screen. Thank you, Danielle. Always good when the tech works. We're going to talk a little bit about Kenji Hashimoto. He was at Heart Mountain and Jerome and the Santa Anita Assembly Center, born in 1920. So the question here is, how do we spell his name correctly for the book? So if we advance. Here are two records that we find his name in. So at the top here, we have the final accountability roster. These records are that you can find on Ancestry, among other places. So you can see here at this final accountability roster, we see his name is spelled Kengi. And then if we look at the Heart Mountain final accountability roster down here, his name is spelled Kenji. So the question is, is his name spelled with a G or with a J? Or is it neither of those things? So I always tell my son, if someone tells you it's either A or B, think for a second that it could be C too, because there could be another way to make something work. So Duncan and his team looked at other records at Ancestry, and here were two that they prioritized. So here we've got the California Birth Index for Kenji Hashimoto, and we've got the World War II. Is it World War II or World War I? Why am I'm blanking on this? Which one is it?
It's World War II, Jen.
Thank you. Sorry, I have to peer over my computer to see it. So this is the World War II, and thank you for jumping in. This is this World War II draft card, or for Kenji. And if you look at this, there are two reasons. We've got a third spelling here. We've got Kenge. And here's two of the reasons that we like these. First of all, if you look at the California Birth Index, this would have been how his parents probably spelled it, because if you think about birth records, they're going to be the people who are reporting this. So you've got that version of the spelling. And then here is the World War II draft card. And draft cards, they're pretty amazing. Boy, they can. I've always said that you can tell a really great story sometimes for people with just one record, and sometimes it's draft cards that do that. Here is Kenji on his draft card, and what we have at the bottom here, I've got to peer over my thing again. Right at the bottom is you have his signature. When my team goes and sits down with people and tells them stuff about what we found for them in their family trees, this signature on a World War II draft card is honestly one of the most emotional moments that we ever have with people. Because if you think about the signature, if you haven't gone and found the draft card for your father or your grandfather, or your great grandfather, when you see that signature, for some people, it's the first time they've ever seen their handwriting, because this is their actual signature. So that can be an emotional reaction. And then for some people, it would be you recognizing the handwriting that you've known and loved about this ancestor that you've had. So that's a moment too, right? Because it's like getting a little piece of them back. Sorry for the digression, but I love World War II draft cards the most. And so this is when you look at this. This is why the volunteers is looking for this. They ultimately use this spelling for Kenji's name because of taking preference for these two records, which so you have to go in, and if you think about it, he talked about how they used census records and vital records and military records and passenger lists and naturalization and records you can find at the National Archives and Angel Island records, all these different things that you learn, and then you try and work through. You get what genealogists call a preponderance of evidence and try and come up with what you consider the best possible name. So this is one of the cases that Duncan and his team used. And when you see his name in the book, it will be spelled Kenge. So just want to talk a little bit about my team and some of the stuff about when we're looking for stories in people's family trees. My team gets to work on television programs. We've worked on things like Who Do You Think You Are? There's a show called Rootless Travel that we worked on that was a Saturday morning educational program. A New Leaf, a bunch of different genealogy programs out there showcasing the power of family history. And one of the things that we do when we're looking at the records is it's always good to understand the historical context that you're looking at as you read these records, and you want to read between the lines. And so there are just a couple of things that I wanted to share for this group, for things that we did a really wonderful episode with brother and sister who went on a family history journey together, where they learned about their great-grandmother and great-grandfather who were incarcerated during the Japanese internment period of time, which they knew about, but it's nice to like be there, see the places, walk where they walked, and understand their story. But it's also good to understand the context between that. And one of the things we looked at was a census record for these folks. And so this will be a census record that was in 1940. And you'll see one of the things that's really interesting here is, especially when you're looking at Japanese American research, at one point it was not lawful that a native Japanese person could own land, farmable land in California. So when we look at this census record, when we look at it and we see the family here, you can see here, if I do this, this is Hoshiko and Terato and Harumi are here. If I were to look at this record for other ethnic groups in America, and I saw that a family here was living, and the son here is the head of the household. You can see Sumio is the head of the household. He's 23, and his parents, Terato and Harumi, who are 50 and 45, are living with them. In a different family, we would see that a son is taking care of his family. We would see that maybe they had fell on hard times, or maybe they had something that made it so that they needed to live in their son's household. But what this is for the Japanese community, it's a clear signal that this son was able to own the land that they lived in, that they lived on, and the land that they farmed. So it's a different perspective when you're looking at it. So it's always good to understand the historical context that's going on. And then as you're going on, we've got lots of great records on Ancestry, but especially when you think about Japanese American research, there's some great records that aren't on Ancestry too. When you think of places like we've talked about the National Archives in Angel Island and those types of places, but we've also found really great archives when you think of universities in California and the amazing things that you can find if you just dig deeper into their holdings. To tell this story that we did for this episode of Roots Less Traveled, we were able to find this picture of their family. They lived in Fresno. They were apricot farmers. And so these, finding a record about this, and then you can see all of the people pictured here are listed in this photograph, which just brings so much more vibrancy. I mean, they say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? Like to see the picture of your ancestors like this, especially maybe younger than you were used to seeing them, that can bring a lot of emotion to the story you're telling. And then there are also these fantastic records that we found online where they had interviewed, they'd done some oral histories with Harumi, and it talked about what her life was like in California before and after the incarceration. And it was just interesting to get, it can be a more quiet story. Like she's talking about how she had to do the laundry and she had to boil the water and put in the wash tub, and just having her talk about what life is like could just add another dimension to your family tree and really bring that individual story to life. So you all, like for this audience, you guys know the context so much better than I do. But just as you do the research, watch for those things to help with your storytelling. The last thing I just want to talk about is I talked with Duncan a couple of weeks ago at the Japanese American National Museum in LA. And as part of being there, Duncan arranged it so that a colleague and I actually got to go to the Book of Names. And I don't know if you know this, but if the names are unclaimed, they let people who don't have Japanese American ancestry also come and honor these ancestors who came before us. So we got the chance to sit down and put a stamp next to a name that had not been claimed. And this is my person right here, Ryuji Tatsuno. I got to put that stamp there, and I kind of felt like what an honor it is to do that, but I felt like Ryuji now is a part of my family, and so I wanted to do some research about him. So I went to Ancestry and I have built a family tree. I've made it public so other people can find it and so that they can learn his story. I've only started and I've got a long ways to go, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. But one of the very first records I found was his World War II draft card. And as I said, I firmly believe that sometimes one record can tell you a whole story about a person. So I found Ryuji's draft card, and this is his. And honestly, it's a pretty emotional draft card, not one that you normally see. You can see where he used to live in Los Angeles and Wall Street, and his mailing address is at the immigrant internment camp. Now, this was a random person that I was given, and here is one of the first records I found out about him. He's 52 years old, born in Osaka, his date of birth. This is something I don't normally see. The name and address of a person who will always know your address is normally a family member or some like a close friend that you have. It's not very often that the person who will know your address is the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Service, right? So there's a whole story about where he was when he had to fill out a World War II draft card and what that meant for him. Again, once again, this is his signature down at the bottom. It got a little crazy after that because World War II draft cards have a back side of the page. And when you turn it over, we learn even more about him. Does he have any other obvious physical characteristics that will aid in identification? And he is missing part of his left leg, which, you know, I was honored because I got to be a part of marking his name in this book, but now I know just a little bit about him. But now there's so much more that I'm hoping to learn. And as I dug in and tried to find out more about him, I found him in a couple census records. I found a passenger list, but I also found that there is another man that's named here. At this point, this is going to be a mystery that I'm going to be working on for a while. This is his signature on the World War II draft. His most likely, it looks like he might be in the World War I draft, but if you compare the signatures, I don't think these are the same people. I don't know. You can like put in the comments whether or not you think they're the same, but these look like two different people to me. Same birth date, same places. So interesting to see, like, so I know that I've got a lot more research to do in order to learn more about him, because I feel like he's part of my family now, or maybe I hope I got to be adopted by him and his family. But it's just one more way of learning these people's names and honoring what they've done. I really appreciate what Duncan and his team has done, and Ancestry has really been honored to be a part of this. And I'm going to turn it back over.
Yes, thank you so much to both of you. I've so enjoyed sitting and listening to this and thinking about these ways we uncover stories and learn more about the people who came before us, whether they are our direct ancestor or people who are community ancestors, is how I've been thinking about it. Because so oftentimes, we think about the stories of immigration and different immigration stations. I'll speak from that perspective from Angel Island and think, well, maybe my family member didn't come through Angel Island. Personally, mine didn't. But my community looks the way that it does because of the people who did come through Angel Island and those who weren't allowed to come in. So thinking about how we are all part of these stories and how all of this impacts our neighbors and our communities and our families directly. I've invited everybody to put questions that they have in the chat for Duncan or Jennifer about the talks that they gave and about Japanese ancestry research. So I'll stop talking for just a second because I know sometimes it's easier to type and come up with a question if I'm not blabbering on.
I'm usually okay in the silence, but I do have to say that I did watch my colleague. She also did a webinar for the Angel Island group here. And it's all about how to get started doing your family tree on Ancestry. So if you want to learn, how to get started if you haven't before, I'd suggest watching that. It's Krista Cowan, who's kind of famous in the genealogy community.
Jennifer, thank you for calling that out. I had meant to do that at the beginning. I appreciate you helping me out with that one. Yes, absolutely. We have that. And we're starting to get some more questions coming in. One is, what is the difference between Ancestry.com and FamilySearch.com? What can be gained in one over the other?
I'm not going to know all the specifics about it, but what I do know is I think it's always worth looking at all the places that you can find information. Like I always start, I build my tree on Ancestry. I watch for those shaky leaves, those hints that are looking through the, 40 billion records we have on the site. And I go through and you've got to decide, are these the right people for you? And then once you've gone through the hints, you're not done on Ancestry. Then you have to actually hit the little search button to search the rest of them because not all the databases are indexed. And then once you've done that, then I like to go to Family Search and see what do they have that can fill in the gaps. Or do they have something that maybe I can read a little bit better? But then I also like to Google names and just to see what comes up when I Google them. I also spend a lot of time, and I'm kind of going here, but I also, one of my favorite things is to look at newspapers.com. I found a really interesting article that Ryuji put in a little classified ad that pretty much says to who I think is his son, hey, I need you to come home. It's really important. And I'm thinking, this is a small newspaper classified. How did he see that? But we didn't have cell phones then, so he had to signal him somehow. So big fan of Family Search. And so I think it's worth using all the resources at your disposal.
I am personally obsessed with newspapers.com. I spend way too much time there.
Well, it's easy to do.
And then Duncan, for you, what's next for the IRE project?
Let's see. For the online, the website, the online archive, idezo.com, we tend to think about it in terms of sight and sound. And the sight part is kind of as Jen was talking about, is something meaningful to exploring who is the person behind the name. And when you can see a photograph of them during World War II, of them in camp, it gives you a better sense of who they were at that time. And so that's one part of our new project is working with organizations like Densho and others to have images of people during World War II in the different camps that they were incarcerated in. So that's the sight part. The voice part is we have a project called Voicing Refuge, and it's a project just like with the Book of Names, putting a stamp in is the kind of interactive or the way that the public can engage the monument as opposed to just passively viewing it. In the case of the online, how do you make an online kind of website, have that feeling to it of interaction. And so we've invited the public to voice the names of people. And so it's becoming this as more and more names come in, are submitted and reviewed and uploaded. You can also hear or let's say you have a bunch of cousins that all want to honor grandma or whatever. You can hear more than one name recording of that person. It's a kind of sonic monument that we're envisioning. So that's what's going on right now with the IDESO part of the project.
That sounds beautiful. I love the idea of both seeing and hearing names and hearing them in different ways. It makes me think of, I have different family members that say my name slightly differently. And so thinking about how you bring that connection in who you are for different folks. We have some thanks that are coming in. Thank you, Professor Williams, for your rapid response to our family's concern about the misspelling of our grandfather's name. This was toward the beginning of the project. So that comes from Dan Kubo. Arlo, thank you for the presentations. Danielle, what would you recommend for a visitor to Angel Island who is interested in Japanese American ancestry? Would reservations be needed? These are great questions. So anybody can visit Angel Island. I'm going to put in our website into the chat because there's part of our website that, well, all of it has really great information. But if you're planning on coming to Angel Island, there's a section about how to plan your visit. Because we are an island, it can be a little bit intimidating for folks to come. But I promise you that if you follow the directions on our website, you will get there and you will have a meaningful experience. But you can take a ferry either from San Francisco at the ferry building, and then you can use your Clipper card and get on it just like you get on BART. Or you can take the ferry from Tiburon. That's called the Angel Island Ferry Company. That you need to buy separate tickets from their company. Both of the ferries take you to Ayala Cove. And from there, it's a 1.2-mile hike. Or you can take a shuttle run by the Angel Island Cafe. All of those links, all of that information is all on this part of our website that I just put in the chat. It takes you to the immigration station where there are two museums. There's the Detention Barracks Museum, and there's the Angel Island Immigration Museum. The Detention Barracks Museum is $5 to enter. AIM is free to enter. And specifically looking at Japanese American history at the site, there's two sort of phases to think about with that. One is the immigration phase from 1910 to 1940. There are folks who were detained. Incarcerated is later, detained on island. And you can find information actually about that through Ancestry.com. We have a computer on site that is linked to the institutional Ancestry account, so you can search that while you're on site. But also most public libraries also have access to Ancestry if you're not able to get an account for yourself. And you can look to see if your family's records are in there because they are immigration records. You can also request them yourself from the National Archives from NARA. Those are all stored in San Bruno for the most part. And you can find those there as well. Also on site, we have the Taken from Their Families exhibit, and that's part of the Detention Barracks Museum that highlights and really tells the story of those who were arrested as enemy aliens and processed through the North Garrison of Fort McDowell at the immigration station site. And we have all of the names of the people who we know of. So, that's not necessarily always perfect, but everybody we know is listed on this site that I've just added here as well. And then if you're not able to come to the site, because in many cases, can be a difficult site to get to, although we will do everything we can to help you get there. We do have this virtual experience as well that I've just put in to help see the site in that light. So we have these many different ways of engaging with the Japanese history of the site. I'm just scrolling up because I saw some other things. Jillian says, it's a beautiful trip over in addition to a very memorable visit. Highly recommend. Thank you, Jillian. I would agree. The juxtaposition on Angel Island is always very striking to me, of the beauty of the site and the harshness of the human experience there. And that's something that those who were processed there, whether as immigrants or as enemy aliens, noted and talk about, whether it's in poetry, or in other forms of writing or in historical memory. I've had the opportunity to be working on some oral history projects as well, with many of this, and that tension comes up over and over again. But it is a beautiful site. We have gone 2 minutes over time, which is very uncharacteristic of me. But I want to thank everybody for being part of this experience, for sitting in community with us and in conversation. I hope that you continue. I'm going to share one more slide real fast. I hope that you stay connected with us. If this is your first time interacting with us, sign up for our newsletter. That QR code goes to our newsletter. If you go to our website, aiisf.org, you can sign up for our newsletter there as well. You can follow us across platforms. We are at AIISFORG across as many platforms as we can. But I really do hope that you join our community and you can continue to be part of our community in the years to come. And I hope everybody has a good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks very much.